In Washington, a political storm is brewing. A storm that threatens not only the stability of the government, but the food security of millions of Americans. As lawmakers clash over budgets and political power, two lifelines for struggling families, SNAP and WIC, hang in the balance. The debate isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about children whose next meal depends on government aid, seniors who rely on monthly benefits to buy groceries, veterans and working families already stretched to their limits. And now, those basic needs are being used as leverage in another bruising political fight. This is the story of how America's hunger programs became the latest battlefield in a high-stakes showdown between Congress, the White House, and the future of social safety nets. Welcome to Redline Reports. Please like and subscribe my channel, and press the bell icon button to get more updates. It's a brisk morning on Capitol Hill. Cameras flash. Reporters crowd the podium. Standing front and center is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, flanked by Senators Amy Klobuchar and Ben Ray Luján. The tone is urgent. The message, clear and direct. Schumer begins, America is facing two crises at once, healthcare and hunger. And in his view, both are being made worse by politics at the top. The senator accuses the administration of refusing to guarantee funding for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, if the government shuts down. For most Americans, SNAP is simply known as food stamps. It's the nation's largest anti-hunger initiative, helping more than 42 million people afford groceries each month. The Women, Infants, and Children program, WIC, offers similar support for pregnant women and young children. These aren't obscure welfare programs. They're the foundation of food security in the United States. And now, as Schumer puts it, that foundation is at risk. Not because Congress lacks the money, but because of political choice. According to Schumer, past presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike, have always ensured that SNAP benefits continued during government shutdowns. It's a tradition rooted in compassion and practicality. After all, hunger doesn't stop when Washington gridlocks. But this time, he says, the administration has taken a different stance, refusing to authorize the emergency funds already available in the Department of Agriculture's contingency account. Schumer's words are sharp but measured. He warns that millions could lose food assistance, not because the money's gone, not because it's illegal, but because it's being deliberately withheld. He frames it as a moral issue, a choice between cruelty and compassion. And in his view, it's cruelty winning out. To understand the weight of Schumer's accusation, we need to step back. A government shutdown happens when Congress fails to pass funding legislation for federal agencies. Essential services keep running, but many programs are disrupted. In previous shutdowns, like those in 2013 and 2019, the Department of Agriculture used emergency funds to keep SNAP payments flowing. Even amid political standoffs, the government found ways to protect families from going hungry. This time, though, that safeguard is in question. Republican leadership in the Senate, according to Schumer, is hesitating to bring bipartisan bills to the floor that would guarantee funding for SNAP and WIC during the shutdown. He points to Senator John Thune, a key figure in Republican leadership, saying that if Thune allowed a vote, the bill would pass overwhelmingly. But Schumer claims Thune and others are reluctant to act, fearful of crossing party lines or defying former President Donald Trump, whose influence still looms large over Republican strategy. That's where the politics come in. The Democrats argue that the administration and its allies are weaponizing hunger, turning SNAP beneficiaries into bargaining chips in a larger fight over health care, taxes, and the national budget. Schumer cites figures showing that the Department of Agriculture still holds roughly $6 billion in emergency funding, money that could sustain SNAP for several weeks, even during shutdown. Yet, he says those funds are being deliberately held back. After Schumer steps away for a vote, Senator Amy Klobuchar takes the microphone. A former prosecutor and longtime advocate for rural and working-class communities, she continues the message with her own blend of outrage and pragmatism. Klobuchar introduces another piece of legislation, one spearheaded by Senator Ben Ray Luján. that would secure both SNAP and WIC funding automatically during shutdowns. The money, she explains, is already there. Congress just needs to authorize its use. She points out something striking. The Department of Agriculture's own website, under the previous administration, once published a contingency plan explicitly stating that SNAP benefits should continue during lapses in funding. That document has since disappeared. In Klobuchar's telling, that missing plan is a smoking gun. Proof that continuing SNAP during a shutdown isn't just possible, it's standard practice. She accuses the current leadership of erasing that precedent for political reasons. But beyond the policy talk, Klobuchar widens the lens. She argues that the turmoil over SNAP and WIC is part of a broader pattern. Economic instability driven by tariffs, healthcare costs, and political infighting. As she lists the rising prices of food, healthcare, and everyday goods, her point becomes clear. Americans are paying the price for dysfunction in Washington. 75% of Affordable Care Act enrollees live in states that voted for Trump, she says. Many of them are now watching their insurance premiums rise and their grocery budgets shrink. And in her words, they know their costs are up, their chaos is up, their corruption is up. Klobuchar's message is less about partisanship and more about accountability. Her call is for Congress to act now, before families suffer consequences that no talking point can justify. Then comes Senator Ben Ray Luján of New Mexico, chair of the subcommittee overseeing SNAP. His tone is impassioned, direct, and grounded in personal experience. He grew up on a small farm. He reminds the audience, and he knows the difference between good soil and what doesn't belong in it. Luján stresses that SNAP funding has never been allowed to lapse in U.S. history. Not once. Not during Democratic administrations, not during Republican ones. He calls the current situation unprecedented and unnecessary. Holding up a printed copy of the vanished contingency plan, he demands to know why it was taken down. Why mislead the public by claiming it's illegal to use the fund when previous administrations did exactly that? His frustration turns to the House of Representatives, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, who has adjourned the chamber while the Senate scrambles for solutions. Luján warns that if SNAP payments stop, roughly 40 million Americans could lose food assistance. Many of them children, seniors, and veterans. He calls it simple math. The USDA already used the contingency fund once this year to cover staff pay. If it was legal then, it's legal now. The real question is political will. In Luján's words, hunger should never be a partisan issue. And yet, it's being treated as one. He challenges his Republican colleagues to stand up publicly for their constituents. Which of you will object to your own people eating? The line lands like a thunderclap. He reminds everyone that SNAP's largest beneficiaries, per capita, include deeply conservative states: Louisiana, Mississippi, West Virginia, and his own New Mexico. Hunger doesn't care about party lines, and neither should compassion. Beyond the fiery exchanges, this debate reveals something deeper about American politics. It's not just about whether SNAP will be funded this month. It's about how government values its most vulnerable citizens. SNAP, created in the 1960s as part of the war on poverty, has long been one of the most effective programs in reducing hunger and supporting low-income families. Every dollar spent on SNAP generates more than $1.50 in local economic activity. It helps grocery stores, farmers, and small businesses. WIC does the same for pregnant women and children, providing nutritional support that prevents long-term health issues. Together, these programs form a safety net that millions of working Americans quietly rely on every day. Cutting or stalling these programs isn't just a political maneuver. It's a real, measurable blow to communities. And that's why lawmakers like Schumer, Klobuchar, and Luján are pushing so hard for immediate action. They insist the administration and Republican leadership already have the tools to prevent a crisis, but are choosing not to use them. The other side argues the funds aren't sufficient and that Congress must pass new legislation first. At its core, this is a fight between two governing philosophies, one that sees social programs as moral obligations and another that views them as fiscal burdens best left to local control. Reporters press Schumer for details. If the contingency fund runs out in a few weeks, what then? He responds that the Senate could pass either Luján's or Missouri Republican Josh Hawley's bill, both bipartisan measures that ensure SNAP keeps running during a shutdown. The votes, he says, are there. The only obstacle is leadership refusing to call them up. That's the recurring theme, a standoff between procedural power and moral urgency. Schumer's closing line echoes through the chamber. They can fund it right now. And with that, the press conference ends, but the story doesn't. As the clock ticks toward another potential shutdown, agencies brace for disruption. Advocacy groups warn of chaos at grocery stores and food banks. Parents wonder whether their benefits will reload next month. It's a scenario that could easily have been avoided, and that's precisely what infuriates the Democrats leading this charge. Behind the politics lies a bigger question about the direction of America's social contract. For decades, federal nutrition programs have operated with bipartisan support. Even during the toughest fiscal debates, both parties recognized that feeding the poor was non-negotiable. But the polarization of the last decade has eroded that consensus. Some conservative leaders argue that federal aid breeds dependency and should be scaled back. Progressives counter that economic hardship is often systemic, not moral, and that cutting food aid punishes children for circumstances they can't control. Caught in the middle are millions of Americans who don't care about political ideology. They just need help getting through the month. The data shows the stakes clearly. SNAP lifted nearly 3 million people out of poverty in 2023. It reduces food insecurity, improves childhood nutrition, and boosts long-term educational outcomes. Economists across the spectrum generally agree. It's one of the most effective government programs ever designed. So why, critics ask, is it always on the chopping block? The answer may be less about economics and more about symbolism. For some, SNAP represents government overreach. For others, it represents government at its best. And in an age of political division, symbolism often outweighs substance. To truly grasp the gravity of this fight, we have to look beyond Capitol Hill. In a rural town in Iowa, a single mother depends on SNAP to buy milk and cereal for her kids. In Detroit, an elderly veteran uses his benefits to stretch a limited pension. In New Mexico, families on tribal lands rely on WIC to provide healthy food for newborns. If funding lapses, these stories become crises. Grocery store transactions decline. Food banks face surges in demand. Communities that already struggle with poverty see even greater strain. That's the real-world effect of what might seem like an abstract political battle. When lawmakers talk about contingency funds or shutdown procedures, they're really deciding whether people eat. And that's why this debate has struck such a nerve. In politics, it's easy to lose sight of the people behind the policies. Budgets, votes, and headlines dominate the conversation. But every dollar debated in Washington has a face attached to it. A family, a senior, a child. Senator Luján's words capture the sentiment. Hunger should never be a partisan issue. As America stands once again on the edge of a government shutdown, that message echoes louder than ever. Will leaders act out of compassion or calculation? Will the safety net hold, or will millions fall through its gaps while politicians argue over principle? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. When the next SNAP payment is due, the nation will learn whether politics or humanity came first. And that, more than any talking point, will define this moment. For Redline Reports, this is your deep dive into the politics of hunger, power, and responsibility in America.